If you're anything like me, when you start a new game up for the first time, you spend a few extra bullets finding out how interactive the environment is. Watching as a column or cover peels away from gunfire, exposing the foundation underneath is extremely immersive, as it gives weight and impact to your actions. Some games really leverage this and have their whole gameplay systems and levels designed around it. As time has gone on, some series have ditched these dynamic breakable elements. Sure, you have huge scripted set pieces, but it's not as fun when the environment is less reactive to the user's actions. Many structures in Gears of War 2 break apart when shot at and expose the rebar beneath them, while in the 5th mainland entry, this effect seems to be on fewer objects and dialed back. Interactive environments are stable in some of the most popular games in the world. Having nice, flashy graphics can help sell your game, and in the pursuit of graphical fidelity, many games have regressed when it comes to interactive environments. In regards to destructible structures, the industry may have peaked in 2009 with the release of Red Faction Guerilla. Guerilla is the third entry into the Red Faction series and set out to revive the dormant franchise 7 years after the previous entry was released. You don't need to be familiar with the previous games to jump right into Guerilla, but one thing you should know is that destruction has been part of the Red Faction DNA from its inception. In the original game, not only could you tear down structures, but you could also deform the very geometry of the terrain. The second entry, Red Faction 2, used the same GeoMod engine from the first entry, but moved the setting from Mars to Earth and was more focused on action, resulting in less dynamic environments. With Red Faction Guerilla, Volition, the developers since the beginning of the series, upgraded their game engine to GeoMod 2.0 and refocused the series on elements of the first while integrating the current trend of open world game design, and Volition was well acquainted with it from their work on the Saints Row series. The game would be set back on Mars, and despite lacking terrain deformation, buildings were larger than ever and now collapsed in a realistic fashion. To give players better awareness of their surroundings during this mayhem, the camera was pulled back to a third-person perspective, which also gave players better reference to the scale of the destruction around them. This fusion of ideas from the original game and modern game trends proved to be a winning formula with both critics and fans alike. The evolution of the series is demonstrated through the changing Red Faction logo. In the original, a pickaxe is held up as a sign of rebellion against the Ultor Mining Corporation, and in the sequel, an assault rifle is held up instead, conveying the action-focused shift. In Guerilla, a sledgehammer is used to express the mass destruction you'll be doing in the game. Since I was young, I loved physics interactions in games, and because of this, Red Faction Guerilla caught my attention. Luckily, I didn't have to rent or buy the game, as it had a badass demo that came out a few weeks before it launched. This demo set it my hunger for destruction, and it wasn't until years later on Steam that I'd buy the game. Having a great demo like this is some of the best marketing you can do for your game. Final Fantasy XVI is a great recent example of this. Several of my friends who had no initial interest in the title bought it because of its enthralling and emotionally charged demo. When browsing old reviews, one of the most common complaints I see about Red Faction Guerilla is the game's lack of story. To be honest, I don't mind this at all. The game's a true destruction sandbox, and the minimal story here makes it clear that developers don't want you thinking about the next story beat, they want you to think about how you're going to tear down that next structure. Our playable character here is Alec Mason, a miner who's just arrived on Mars from Earth looking for work and at the behest of his brother. It doesn't take long for Alec to see Mars is under strict control by the Earth Defense Force, also called the EDF. After terraforming Mars, the EDF placed the planet under martial law. The citizens here aren't particularly fond of the EDF, and Daniel, Alec's brother, aligned himself with the Red Faction, a revolutionary group first seen in the original game where they fought against the Ultor Mining Corporation. Daniel attempts to rope Alec into the fight against their oppressors, a fight Alec wants no part of until his brother is gunned down before his eyes. Due to his association with Daniel, Alec is harassed by the EDF and is forced to join up with the Red Faction.
They'll hunt you from here to the ice caps.
You said I was Red Faction.
Like it or not, Mason, you are now.
This all happens within the first half hour of the game, and from there, you won't run into another cutscene for hours. Before executing liberation missions, which advance the world state of the game, brief bits of lore and story will be given to the player, and outside of Alec, there's only a few noteworthy characters. There's not that many cutscenes, and the story's not really what I took away from the game, so this is Alec, and that's Simania, and together, you two manage to liberate Mars. There are some unexpected bumps in the road, but through sheer will and salvaging basically everything on the planet, the mission's able to get done. After the game's opening, it immediately sets you loose on the world to blow shit up. Destruction here is physics driven and holds up very well today. Due to this design, players will always want to identify key structural components and take them out first. Check out this house collapsing for instance. It looks great sliding down the hill, and all it took was one properly aimed shot to send the whole thing crashing down. Prior to this moment, I detached the rear of the building from the ground and destroyed the other major supports. You can just randomly place charges and hope to blow a building up, but knowing the structural elements really makes it more fun and rewarding. But if you have a walker, you can just walk on right through there and the building will probably collapse underneath you. Environment artists and building designers working on Red Faction Guerilla had to learn to think like architects and structural engineers when constructing the buildings in their game, because of the realistic physics simulation. If they got too ambitious with a building with no regard for its infrastructure, the simulated stress would often cause a building to just destroy itself. This simulation makes every building breakdown unique. Even if you targeted the same supports, perhaps the order changed, causing the building to fall one way instead of another. Truly dynamic destruction on this level is rare. Even in games like Battlefield that tout their levels of destruction, they have scripted building failures, which results in the same look every time. While Red Faction Guerilla does a great job showing you the chaos of a collapsing structure, it also conveys the feeling too. As the stress on a building grows, your controller will gradually vibrate more and more, and it feels like you're connected to the building itself, holding on for dear life. The camera will also start to rumble, and when the building finally hits the tipping point, you feel the tension release as it all comes tumbling down. The arsenal at your disposal here is surprisingly diverse, offering great tools for demolition and unique weaponry. Weapons are categorized into one of three groups: Red Faction, EDF, or Marauders, the Mad Max-esque wild people of Mars. Weapons looted off EDF or Marauders are unlocked and permanently accessible from Red Faction weapon caches. There's a decent but standard selection of armaments from these two groups, nothing too wild. The EDF has what you'd expect from a sci-fi militant faction, with the addition of singularity bombs, which look great when tearing down structures. Marauders tend to use more barbaric weaponry, with blades attached to seemingly everything they can get their hands on. The most unique weapons come from Simania, the resident Red Faction engineer. By bringing salvage, the game's primary currency, to Sam, she can build and upgrade all sorts of guns and gear. Salvage is collected by completing most tasks and can also be found when tearing down structures. Large caches of the currency can be uncovered by mining one of the hundreds of ore clusters scattered around the map. Mason's first weapon is the reliable sledgehammer, used for intimate building teardowns and turning enemies into ragdolls. There's two upgrades to the sledgehammer, which change its appearance and increase its strength a bit. After beating the game, even more sledgehammer variants unlock, including an ostrich. Which seems to be an April Fool's joke gone too far. The next tool you'll get familiar with are the remote charges. The charges feature the most upgrades out of anything in the game. You'll immediately want to upgrade your carrying capacity, but from there you can increase the number of charges you can set from 2 to 12. Not only does this increase your demolition efficiency, but each step also expands the charge's blast radius. They're great for blowing buildings sky high and blasting groups of enemies. Most players will probably always carry these two weapons in 2 of their 4 slots, as the sledgehammer is unequipable and the proxy charges are just too damn useful and fun. The only other weapon I would consider essential is a nano rifle. Unlocked several liberation missions into the game, the nano rifle provides Mason with a surgical tool of unparalleled potential. The gun is created by Simania, but at its core is a nanoforge, a device with roots from the first game, capable of spawning nanites. When placed into the rifle, the nanoforge fires projectiles that disintegrate humans, concrete, steel, really anything it hits. This makes it the perfect instrument for taking out infrastructure that would normally be out of reach, difficult enemies, heavy armor, and especially the EDF gunships, which can be taken out in a single shot if one of their wings is destroyed. This rifle never left my inventory once I unlocked it, but even with its capacity fully upgraded, it can only carry a few dozen shots. The other Red Faction weapons aren't as relevant, but are still worth mentioning. There's the Arc Welder, a modified welding tool that's great at frying groups of enemies and those inside vehicles. There's also the Grinder, a machine that fit right into dead space. This weapon fires bladed discs best used against enemy soldiers that can also explode when upgraded. Both of these weapons fit the ingenuity and desperation of the guerrillas, as they're truly engineering tools turned deadly. Every action game with guns has to have a rocket launcher, and here there are two flavors. The first being a pretty standard one that can fire several rockets when upgraded, and the next being the thermobaric rocket launcher, whose missiles can cause truly massive explosions. Backpacks are the final piece of gear Sam offers, and these grant Alec unique abilities. Only one backpack can be worn at a time, but once purchased, they can be exchanged at any safe house. If you need a little extra destructive prowess, the Rhino and Tremor backpacks are great options, and they can even be used in equipment-limited challenges, which can give you the edge you need. Combat-oriented backpacks are on offer too, and these can be helpful in large firefights, but I hardly ever used them. I can see why they'd be more useful in multiplayer, but in single player, I never really felt the need for them. Out of all the combat-oriented backpacks, the stealth one was my favorite. You could sneak into a base, plant a bunch of explosives, blow it up, and then sneak out. The recharge time on it's not bad at all, and you can even fire guns while using it, so you can stay in stealth almost constantly. Finally, there's mobility backpacks, and the best one, the jetpack, is locked behind some story progress. Once I got my hands on it, it never left my back, and it can be upgraded for better performance. The jetpack perfectly fits guerrilla hit-and-run tactics. It let me reach areas with ease, and once I finished tearing down a building, I could escape off a sheer cliff, and the enemies couldn't pursue me down it. Prior to unlocking the jetpack, my main means of escape would be a car. Most cars in Red Faction Guerrilla are rugged vehicles with knobby tires built to handle the brutal Martian terrain. There are some more streamlined futuristic speedsters, but the Red Faction typically takes industrial vehicles and mounts guns onto them. Driving feels sort of like an arcade racer with very bouncy physics. You can catch a ton of air off sand dunes, but the uneven surface of Mars can also leave you bouncing all over the place. If you're looking to wreak some real havoc with a vehicle, look no further than the Walkers, the industrial mechs of the Red Faction universe. The heavy Walker is gargantuan and extremely durable. It's built for tearing shit down. The wide swings of its arms rip through any structure and send vehicles flying. If you're looking for something nimbler, the light walker can still fuck an enemy's base up. The most common, yet my favorite of the three walkers, has meager weapon accommodations, but makes up for it in agility and the ability to briefly fly. If you want guns on your walker, the combat variant is the one for you. Armed with missile launchers, it can lay waste to squads of enemies and their vehicles. With a heavy reliance on vehicles for transportation around Mars, you might be afraid Red Faction Guerrilla is too bloated and set in a massive world. That's not really the case here, and coming from some recent open world games, I found the design in Guerrilla to be quite refreshing. I was able to complete the story and a solid chunk of the side content in a 15-hour playthrough. The game's world is split into 7 major locations, but a couple of these you won't do much in besides maybe a story mission. I typically operated in one zone at a time, and 2 at the most. Sectors are dotted with content like you'd expect in an open world game, and the best stuff here is focused on destruction. Completing side missions called Guerrilla Actions awards the players with salvage, civilian morale, loosening EDF control, or some combination of these things. The morale mechanic helps the experience of liberation feel real. The higher the morale value is, the more likely it will be for random civilians to join the Red Faction during combat, and at high levels, it can spawn whole groups of resistance fighters to help Mason out. It's not uncommon for a small hit-and-run gig to turn into a sizable firefight. The guerrilla fighters aren't very competent at taking down enemies, but they do a great job soaking up bullets and drawing enemy fire, so you can plant explosives or take out the tougher enemies. EDF control of a sector restricts access to liberation missions, so naturally, you'll want to drop this number as soon as possible. Some missions loosen the EDF's grasp on the sector, but taking out high-value targets across the map was my preferred means of accomplishing this. I love the freedom you have with these destruction targets. Maybe you want to turn your car into a bomb, crash it into the enemies and go out guns blazing. Or maybe you prefer a more tactical approach with a jetpack and the nano rifle, shooting just a couple times and then dropping a whole building. If you love inventive thinking for destruction like me, you'll really like the Destruction Master Guerilla Actions. This side content restricts your weapon access to whatever the challenge presents you, but as I previously mentioned, you can sneak a backpack in for some extra firepower. Beyond the inventory being restricted, a time limit's set, and if you want extra rewards, you'll have to aim for the pro time. Some of these challenges get surprisingly creative. On this map, you only have a sledgehammer and a few charges. It starts you off really far from the target building, and if you want any hope of hitting the pro time, you're gonna have to take this opportunity to use the landscape and explosive barrels like a deadly driving range. In another, you'll be attaching remote charges to explosive barrels and hurling them down pipes towards the buildings far below. Destruction Master is a lot of fun, and hitting a pro time rewards you with a ton of salvage. Guerrilla Actions do more than just give you money or changing control of a sector. As you finish more of them, Sam will be able to craft new gears and weapons. I never found unlocking Liberation missions to be a chore, as destruction targets are enjoyable to take out, and most Guerrilla Actions are short and offer good rewards. Some of the Guerrilla Actions like Transporter and Collateral Damage are less enjoyable because of the driving physics and the companion AI, which isn't that good. By the time I was done completing a sector's final liberation mission, there wasn't much left to do besides move to the next one. Destruction is permanent in Red Faction Guerilla, so if you blow up a bridge, it's still gonna remain that way the next time you come by. This destruction permanence makes revisiting old sectors actually look like the aftermath of a war zone. The only way to reset destruction is by beating the game and using an option from the load menu or the reconstructor tool. Even with destruction reset, there aren't as many opportunities to earn salvage and no point in trying to change EDF control or civilian morale. I really would have appreciated a new game plus option here because after beating the game, there wasn't a ton left for me to do, and when you beat the game, there's quite a few things you can buy, so having the ability to play back through the story again and get more salvage would have been great. On the topic of not being overly bloated, there's a few kinds of collectibles in Red Faction Guerilla, and most of them here tend to reward you with salvage or destructive capabilities. I'm not much of a completionist, so I didn't really feel any need to go hunt down every ore outcrop, or bit of EDF propaganda, or salvage crate, but there's tons of them scattered around the map, and they all involve you breaking each to collect it. The only collectible you can pick up are the radio tags. There's 36 of them in total, and they provide short stories and fragments of lore from the Red Faction universe. When you collect 3 tags, they'll guide you to a massive ordnance airburst, better known as a Moab. Moabs automatically attach to vehicles when they're driven over, and when they detonate, outside of the campaign, there's a few other game modes to extend your playtime with Red Faction Guerilla. I would love to speak on the game's multiplayer, but unfortunately, the servers are totally dead. This is even in the remastered version of the game too, so the original game servers are probably even more vacant, if not taken offline altogether. If you do want to have some local co-op fun though, you can go to the other game modes and change the number of players so you can compete with each other trying to take down a target in the fastest time possible. All these extra game modes are of course centered around blowing shit up, but usually doing so tactically and within a time limit. The setup menu here offers a variety of rules, such as using specific weapons or a backpack, and there's actually a surprising number of maps to play on, as the DLC is included in the remastered version of the game. You can definitely play these game modes like a party game with 4 other people and just trade off the controller, or you can compete with others online aiming for a spot on the leaderboard. If anyone watching is familiar with Games for Windows Live and what a terrible service it was, you might find it funny that there's actually a map with the letters for the service and you can just blow them up to really let out your anger, but luckily this service was removed from most games. The last piece of extra content is a DLC story, so if you really enjoyed the story of Red Faction Guerilla and want to know more about Simania before the game's events, definitely check this one out, as she has a history with the Marauders, and this will let you explore it. Bringing back a dormant franchise is always a gamble, and with Red Faction Guerilla, it paid off. The game was a commercial success and sold over 1 million units by the end of 2009. I wasn't able to find sales numbers beyond this, but the game sold well enough to receive a remaster or a remastered version, which most all of the gameplay you've seen today is captured from. Sci-Fi, the American cable network, took notice of Guerrilla 2 and helped publish the game's sequel, Red Faction Armageddon, which follows Alec and Simania's grandson, Darius Mason. Sci-Fi went beyond helping with the next entry as they also produced the stellar Red Faction Origins movie, which bridged the gap between the two games. Armageddon made some strange changes as aliens were introduced to the series, and the open world that worked so well in Guerrilla was dropped for a linear narrative. This is a bizarre change in design. The freeform destructive sandbox of Guerrilla is its strongest aspect, while its narrative isn't very noteworthy. This change does harken back to the linear structure of the original two games, but the freeform sandbox really just lets the new destruction system breathe better. Unlike Guerrilla, Armageddon never received a sequel or a remaster. I'll be playing Armageddon down the line and making a video giving my thoughts on it, so subscribe if you want to see that as soon as it goes up in the future. Now jumping back over to Red Faction Guerilla. It is a product that understands its strength in destruction and physics technology and leans into them. Although the story isn't the best, it's kept to a minimum, and the idea of liberating Mars sets up a realistic backdrop to justify the havoc you'll be causing. Red Faction Guerilla ranks as a solid B on my tier list. It's a game I'll definitely return to in the future, probably not for a full replay, but just to run around and tear things down for an hour or two. There's not many games, even in 2023, that come close to this level of interactive destructibility. If you remember playing Red Faction Guerilla, or just found out about it through this video, drop a thumbs up down below. And if you want to check out more games from the past, look at my channel, where I upload a new video roughly once a month. For now, I'm checking out. Have a great rest of your day and take care.